thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm good. I know there's only two modes of weather in London, which is either miserable or too hot. Like, complain about both. So
my favourite thing is a friend of mine is going camping this weekend, and the weather report now says it's going to absolutely rain. You can't tell whether he's happy or not. It's brilliant fun.
The other mode.
Exactly right. So listen, you're described mathematician, science presenter, and all-round badass. Tell me why.
It's so nice to hear you say it, Nick. I put that on the top of my website. It's like a little, like how there's the blue M&Ms on the rider. It's like this trick that people do. It's sort of like that kind of a version. So it's like a secret that I leave, and then I know when people say it that they're a good sort of person. So I appreciate that from you. So I'm a mathematician. I study patterns in human behaviour. I'm an associate professor in the mathematics of cities, which really means collecting data about how people behave, about where we go, about how we interact with one another, looking at the patterns that we create in space and time, and really grabbing hold of them from a mathematical perspective, and really, I guess, trying to get as much insight and intuition as you can about who we are and why we behave in the way that we do.
And you work alongside kind of computer scientists, physicists, obviously other mathematicians, architects, geographers, and a variety of other people. I suppose what surprised you from these different people and how they look at stuff which you never thought about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you are going to look at something like how people live in cities, you need to have all of those different perspectives. They have to all come together. I mean, I sort of think in a way that the discipline boundaries that we work within at the moment, this is what physics is, and this is what maths is, and this is what architecture is. Those are boundaries that were created in 18th century. I mean, it just the modern world just doesn't exist like that anymore. There are these, the subjects, I think, blend into one another. And I think that only when you're willing to look at humanity through all of those lenses simultaneously can you really understand who we are. So just to give you an example, because I know that maths and human behavior don't really feel like they necessarily sit that well together, and I'm fully aware of that. But one of the very first things that I did when I started public speaking was I had a session about the mathematics of love. Right now, if you knew anything of my dating history, you would know that this is not something I'm an expert in, right? Like how to maximize your own love life. But the reason why I chose it is because I think that it demonstrates the point that I'm trying to make here, which is that actually, once you're willing to encompass all things, there really is no limit to what mathematics can apply to, really. And in our own love lives, for example, even though there's sort of the romance of poetry and the literature of the way that people described how it feels, music and art and whatever, there are also these very clear patterns in the way that we behave and the decisions that we choose to make across the course of our own love lives, right? So, for example, the number of people that you date before you settle down, there's a very clear mathematical pattern that can be captured with data in that. Also, the type of people that we are that are successful, particularly successful in an online dating context, the type of pictures that work, the type of phrases that allure people in or seem more appealing, but also actually even the way that conversations happen in long-term relationships. So when you have arguments, right? I'm talking about arguments, basically like the way that they ebb and flow and evolve over time and end up spiraling downwards, and then you sort of dig yourself out, and and then they repeat themselves over time. There are, if you're willing to look at it from that data-driven perspective, there are these incredibly clear mathematical patterns that are hiding beneath all of it, that you can really use to gain insight into how we are the way that we are.
I find it fascinating. I'm a self-confessed maths geek, so I love it anyway. But so from your point of view, is maths creative or is it logic? And how do you get frustrated by how people perceive maths?
The answer to the second part of the question is absolutely yes. I know it's not considered the sexiest subject, so I've long learned that. People, well, I think that people imagine that it's this subject that really belongs in I don't know, like dusty textbooks, right? Like over in the nerd corner of the library. Um, and I just think that the reality really couldn't be farther from that truth. I think that it's it's both logic and creative. I see it as this living, breathing language that just allows you to kind of, it's like a portal to another dimension, really. I mean, I know that sounds a bit grand, but it really is. I think that once you start seeing things mathematically, I think there are insights, there are surprises, and like I guess counterintuitive lessons that you just otherwise wouldn't have access to. That's really, I think, the way that I see this.
You've recently co-authored a book on the complete guide to absolutely everything. How did you narrow down what everything was, and kind of what's it taught you? What have you taken away?
Well, okay, but technically, the book is called Everything Abridged, right? And the abridged is doing a hell of a lot of work.
Fair point.
Abridged into 250 pages or whatever it is. Yeah, the idea behind that book. So this is, I guess, in it's kind of it's different from my normal the writing that I do on my own. So my previous book to this was a book really about data and about algorithms and about, it's quite a serious book, although inevitably with humor within it, because I don't know any other way. But it was a book really about how data-driven decision making is changing our society, and sometimes for the better, and sometimes maybe introducing more harms than good. But this book, the Everything Abridged, as I'm calling it, is it's kind of a break from that. So it's co-authored with my co-presenter on my Radio 4 program, which is a show that we do really where people send us in questions of things that they've always been curious about, right? So we had a question from a kid that was like, what's the smallest dinosaur, right? Which sounds like quite a simple question, but actually to uncover it, you have to travel on this incredible voyage of discovery to, through dinosaur bones, through like paleontology, through like the limits of biology and evolution. I mean, it's incredible amount that single question unfurls. So the idea behind this book, that was sort of the starting point for that Everything Abridged book. And yet, as we were writing it, we realized that actually the key thing about science, I think, is that intuition is a really terrible guide. Like there are things that you feel that that you're sure that and actually your instincts really let you down a lot, right? So I mean, if you relied completely on your intuition and didn't have any knowledge, right, didn't have any sort of external information, if you totally relied on your intuition, you would think that the earth was flat because it looks flat, right? You would think that the sun went around the earth because that's the way that it looks. You would think that, I don't know, sharks are more dangerous than bathtubs, right? Like these are the things that just feel like they're instinctively true. And the problem is that as humans, we don't experience the world as it objectively is. We experience it through the sort of messy lens of our own perception. And the only way that we have created, as humanity, to step outside of ourselves and to experience the world as it really is, and not just as how we perceive it to be, is through the creation of science and through the creation of mathematics. And so really that book is it's all about that, really. It's all about the ways in which our intuition lets us down, and the really surprising and kind of counterintuitive things that science tells us about the world, that we can only access because once you start looking at things through that mathematical, that scientific lens.
Let me ask one last question, just about kind of the last year and obviously the pandemic and everything go through. Is this possibly a time that mathematics can kind of, the joy of maths can seize the moment to help people find their way through, and how well is it doing?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So it's certainly true that I think our newspapers have been filled with graphs. Our heads have been filled with mathematical ideas. Our conversations have been driven by these very mathematical questions in a way that certainly I've never experienced before. But I also think that actually, I think it's too early to tell whether something has fundamentally shifted. But I always think that actually, it's not that people aren't, it's not that people can't get on board with these quite high level ideas, things like our numbers, right? It's not that they're too difficult to understand. It's that people really genuinely need a reason to care about it. You need that, you need to be motivated to understand what this stuff is. And if 2 years ago, I was like, right, everyone, I'm going to give you a lecture on logarithmic axes. I mean, no, like nobody would be interested at all. And yet now there are genuinely Twitter accounts where they do nothing but talk about logarithmic axes, and they've got 200,000 followers, right? Like, but this is the thing. I think it's about having that reason to care. So this is what I try and do in my talks and in my books and in my radio shows and in my TV programs. It's not so much that that I want to sort of stand there and tell you about these really high level mathematical objects or like techniques or anything. It's more like I want to tell you about how people catch serial killers and what the strange logical steps that you can take to uncover these hidden patterns in the way that people behave, and how you can use that to your advantage to really narrow down your list of suspects, right? Or I want to show you how when you're having an argument with your spouse, there are secrets hiding within that, mathematical secrets that can tell you how to have a better relationship. Like, that's really, I think, my main objective, is that I have this entire arsenal of incredible tools and techniques that reveal the world in a way that nothing else can. And those are the stories that I want to share.
On that tantalizing note, thank you so much indeed for your time, and really appreciate your time and that. A great conversation.
Likewise.
Cheers.